It began on one of those Sundays that feel too calm to be real. The kind of morning where the world outside your window looks perfectly ordinary, yet you sense something waiting just beneath the surface. I had just unpacked the last box in my modest suburban home. After years of chasing fugitives across state lines as a U.S. Marshal, I had pictured this new chapter of my life as quiet, steady, and finally free from chaos. A porch, a dog, maybe even neighbors who waved politely and minded their own business. That was the dream. But peace has enemies, and mine introduced herself before I had even finished hanging my curtains. Karen. Mid-50s, every hair on her head frozen in place like a helmet, oversized sunglasses, even in the shade, and a voice that could cut through brick. She marched across the street the second day I moved in, chin lifted high as if she already owned the block. Pointing at the American flag I had draped proudly across my porch, she declared, "We have standards in this neighborhood. Decorations must be cleared with the board first." Her tone wasn't advice. It was a warning. I smiled, forcing myself to stay calm. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, though I hadn't seen a single mention of any board in my purchase papers. Truth was, Karen didn't need paperwork to feel powerful. She carried herself as though the rules were whatever she decided they were, and everyone else was just lucky she allowed them to live nearby. At first, her harassment came in whispers of inconvenience. Notices taped to my door, accusing me of violating neighborhood standards. Sloppy, handwritten notes about how my government-issued car looked too official for a residential street. Complaints about my dog's barking, even though he barely made a sound. Each time, I crumpled up the notes and tossed them aside. I had faced criminals with nothing left to lose. A nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands wasn't going to shake me. But ignoring Karen was like daring a storm to grow stronger. She didn't retreat when dismissed. She escalated. One afternoon, while repairing a fence in my backyard, I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was sharp, trembling with the thrill of control. "If he won't listen, I'll make him listen. I've got my own officers." The words stopped me cold. I wasn't scared, but I knew desperation when I heard it. People like Karen, once their ego is bruised, can make reckless, dangerous choices. And sure enough, 2 nights later, just after 9 p.m., the pounding started. Heavy fists against my front door, shaking it in its frame. When I opened it, the sight before me would have been laughable if it hadn't carried such menace. 3 men stood there in mismatched uniforms. Black tactical vests with crooked patches that read W Police. Toy-like badges clipped to their belts. Cheap radios buzzing static at their shoulders. Behind them, a beat-up SUV idled in my driveway, a red and blue party light suction cupped to the roof as if it were some kind of official cruiser. The tallest one barked at me, "Step outside. You're under arrest for repeated W violations and non-compliance with community standards." For a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity. But then I saw her, Karen, standing smugly at the edge of my driveway, arms folded like a queen watching her soldiers carry out her decree. That's when I realized this wasn't a prank. It was an attack, her twisted way of driving me out of the neighborhood for good. I stood in the doorway, staring at them. Their cheap costumes, their false authority, it was almost surreal. But what made my blood run colder was the smug grin plastered on Karen's face. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was her war. The tallest man stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You've ignored citations. We're here to take you into custody," he barked, puffing his chest as if the crooked letters stitched onto his vest gave him real power. I tilted my head, calm, deliberate. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "We're the W Police," another sneered, voice cracking slightly as he tried to sound intimidating. That was it, the confirmation I needed. They weren't just bluffing with fake uniforms. They had created an entire fantasy police force to back up Karen's ego. I felt a sharp pang of disbelief. I'd seen fugitives pull scams, con artists weave elaborate lies, but never had I seen neighbors stoop this low. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Karen's confidence radiating. She thought she had me cornered, that her little theater production was going to break me. She didn't realize she was standing in front of someone who had dealt with real criminals, real danger, and real authority. "All right," I said evenly, keeping my voice controlled. "Give me a second to grab my ID." The tallest one nodded, clearly pleased with himself. They thought they had won. They thought I was about to surrender. I stepped back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar, the shadows of my hallway swallowing me whole. But when I returned, I wasn't holding a driver's license. I held up my badge. Not some toy, not some cheap knockoff stitched together in desperation. A real, gleaming, unmistakable emblem of the United States Marshal Service. The effect was immediate. Their fake bravado evaporated. The tallest one froze, his jaw tightening, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. Another shifted uneasily, his cheap radio crackling against the silence. Karen's smirk faltered, just a fraction, but I caught it. I let the silence drag out, let them sit in their fear. Then I spoke, my voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the night air. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. Attempted unlawful arrest, another felony. Do you boys really want to see how deep this hole goes? The color drained from their faces. Their tough act crumbled in seconds. One of them stammered, we were just following orders. From the W president. I didn't even look at him. My eyes locked on Karen, who had taken a nervous step back, her sunglasses nowhere to hide her now. I raised a finger, pointing straight at her. You organized this. That makes you complicit. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local police, never breaking eye contact with Karen. My voice was steady, firm, professional. Years of fieldwork trained me for moments like this. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night air. The fake cops shifted uneasily, their cheap radios buzzing uselessly as if to remind them of their make-believe authority. Karen's smirk had vanished completely now, her arms folded tighter across her chest, like she was holding herself together. Then the real police cruisers pulled up. Headlights swept across the driveway, and the difference was night and day. Proper uniforms, trained officers, flashing lights washing over the scene. Against them, Karen's little squad looked like children caught in a Halloween prank gone horribly wrong. Step back. Hands where we can see them, one of the officers commanded, their tone clipped and professional. The impostors froze, caught between panic and humiliation. The tallest one tried to mumble something about community standards, but the words died in his throat. Their party store badges glinted weakly under the cruiser lights, exposed for what they really were, cheap lies. Neighbors began pouring out of their homes, phones in hand, recording every second. Whispers carried through the air, some laughing in disbelief, others shaking their heads. A few even muttered. Finally, Karen, realizing the spectacle was unraveling, scrambled to spin the narrative. It was just a misunderstanding, she stammered, her voice suddenly small compared to the booming confidence she carried days earlier. I was only trying to enforce the rules. The community rules, but no one was buying it. Not the neighbors. Not the officers. Not me. The police cuffed the 3 fake cops on the spot, charges of impersonating law enforcement and attempted kidnapping. When they turned to Karen, her protests grew more frantic. You can't do this. I was protecting the neighborhood, she cried. Yet the click of the handcuffs silenced her better than any argument could. And just like that, the so-called ruler of the block was dethroned in front of the very people she had bullied for years. The days that followed were unlike anything the neighborhood had seen before. For years, Karen had strutted through the streets like a self-appointed queen, barking orders, handing out fake fines, and intimidating anyone who dared question her. But now, with her mugshot plastered across local news and her arrest the talk of every front porch, her empire of fear began to collapse. Neighbors who had once stayed silent suddenly found their voices. One by one, people came forward with stories that painted a chilling picture of how deep her manipulations had run. An elderly couple admitted she had fined them hundreds of dollars for lawn violations, money she had pocketed without a shred of paperwork to back it up. A young family confessed she had threatened to have their dog taken away unless they complied with her landscaping rules. Another neighbor revealed that she'd sent anonymous letters warning him to move his too noisy motorcycle or face eviction, something she had no authority to enforce. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been living under her shadow, each family too afraid to challenge her alone. But now, with the truth out, the fear dissolved. People gathered on sidewalks, sharing their stories with a mix of relief and anger, and every confession chipped away at the illusion of power Karen had built. The official wall, her fake organization, crumbled overnight. Without her strong hand to prop it up, it was nothing more than a name scribbled on letters and threats. The real HOA board, embarrassed they had allowed her to run wild for so long, quickly distanced themselves. Within a week, every trace of her authority had vanished. For me, the neighborhood felt different. People who had once just nodded politely at me now stopped to shake my hand to thank me for standing up when they couldn't. I wasn't seeking recognition, but the gratitude was humbling. One man, a father of two, told me quietly, "We were afraid of her. You showed us we didn't need to be." It struck me then. Karen hadn't just been a nuisance. She had built a reign of fear. And fear is only ever powerful until someone decides not to play along. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple, I finally felt the kind of peace I had been searching for when I first moved in. The neighborhood was quieter now, not because life had stopped, but because the constant tension Karen brought with her had finally lifted. For the first time, kids rode their bikes down the street without her screaming about violations. Neighbors waved freely at one another instead of ducking their heads, worried she might be watching. It felt like the place had taken its first deep breath in years. I thought back to that moment when the fake cops stood on my doorstep, puffed up with authority they didn't have, and how quickly it all fell apart when I showed them my badge. That was the truth about people like Karen. They only seem powerful until you shine a light on them. Their rules, their threats, their so-called control, it's all smoke and mirrors, and it only works as long as people are too afraid to question it. What struck me most was how easily fear had kept everyone silent. Good, hardworking people had lived under her thumb because it seemed easier to comply than to fight back. And maybe I understood that better than anyone. After years of chasing fugitives, I'd seen how fear of losing a job, of standing out, of retaliation, could turn entire communities into prisoners of their own hesitation. But I'd also learned something else. Courage doesn't always mean charging into danger. Sometimes it's as simple as standing firm when someone tries to push you down. Karen had tried to break me by sending her fake enforcers, by turning my own doorstep into a stage for her intimidation. Instead, she had broken herself. Her empire of fake power crumbled the second it was confronted with truth. That's when it became clear to me. Power has nothing to do with loud voices or flashing lights. Real power comes from integrity, from refusing to bow to bullies no matter what costume they wear. And so, as the last light of the day slipped behind the rooftops, I leaned back in my chair, finally at peace. I hadn't moved here to be a hero, but if exposing Karen's game gave my neighbors the courage to stand tall, then maybe that was worth it. Because in the end, fear only works when it goes unchallenged. And the moment you decide you won't be silent anymore, you take away the bully's greatest weapon. That was the lesson Karen left behind. Not the one she intended, but the one that mattered most.